Hello, my friends. It's a great privilege for me to be speaking to Dr. Ellen J. Langer, the author of Mindfulness and now this new book, The Mindful Body. And it's an extraordinary book. The subtitle says Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. So, first of all, congratulations, Ellen, for this extraordinary book.
Thank you,
I'm
Deepak.
enjoying it, and I hope after this conversation, we have approximately 15 million people that we'll reach. So, hopefully, they'll
Well,
enjoy it
I'll
too.
be happy if only 10 million take it.
Okay, that's okay. So, first of all, I have to tell you that I first encountered you without you knowing it in the 1980s when my friend Skip Alexander
Uh-huh.
started talking about your work. As you know, he's no longer with us, and he was very fond of you. He was one of your graduate students,
No, he
right?
was my postdoc.
He was
Yeah.
your postdoc. And then after that, I read your study on the aging study, and I started quoting it to everyone. Uh, and it was for a long time of great interest to me. And you inspired me to write Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, and later other books on aging as well. As you know, it's becoming a trend now. Health.
As we get older, it's not unpredictable.
It's done. So let's talk about that study very briefly before we get into the book because it's
Okay.
extraordinary.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the book deals with the main point of that study. So this was a study, actually, Deepak, I can call it immodestly a famous study because it turns out if you tune into The Simpsons Go to Havana, they
I
talk
see.
about the study. So it's out there. But this was the first test of the mind body unity idea. And behind that is just a simple thought mind, body, these are just words. If we put them back together, then wherever we're putting the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So we've done lots of studies. The counterclockwise study, which you're referring to, was the very first test of this. Very simply, we retrofitted a retreat to 20 years earlier, and we had elderly men live there for a week as if they were their younger selves. They spoke about the past as if it was happening right at this moment, and everything surrounding. They were watching movies and television shows, all from the past, discussing them again in the present tense. And it was amazing in that we found in a period of time as short as a week, it might have even been 5 days, their vision improved, their hearing improved, their strength, their memory, and they look noticeably younger, all without any medical intervention. So now, faster forward, we have lots of new studies that as soon as you ask me, it's like pressing a button. I'll just go on and on. I'm going to give you a chance to see if you want me to talk about the newest tests of mind body unity.
Well, we will. And I will say that this very insight that body and mind are a unified process, uh, I believe in consciousness. So, consciousness is both mind and body, and they're entangled as processes. And of course, that was part of my work with Seymour Reichlen, who was studying the molecules of emotion at Tufts at that same time.
Right, right.
We were looking at serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and anandamide. And if you may know, Candice Pert was one of our colleagues. She wrote The Molecules of Emotion,
Right.
etc., etc. So you laid the ground for that almost certainly. But let's talk about your book. And once again, the book is The Mindful Body, author of Mindfulness. It was the first time I heard the word mindfulness. It was because of Ellen Langer. And, she says in her book that mindfulness is just noticing activity, noticing things. And you don't have to meditate in order to be mindful. That's a very important insight. If you notice something actively, you're actually aware of it and it reveals its nature to you and it ultimately reveals your own nature to you. So,
Right.
um,
Well, so it's interesting because If you tell people to note, they think they're noticing. And because the problem is when you're not there to know you're not there. And the 45 years of research says, sadly, most of us are mindless most of the time. And that's because we think we know. So I often start lectures with things like, oh, I'll ask you, Deepak, but you'll know the answer, but still, how much is 1 + 1? People,
It could be
okay,
anything.
don't answer that. It's not fair. You've read the
Yeah,
book. And you know.
and I
Okay.
also read the book, by
Right.
the way. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So most people do the
In my world, by the way, 1 + 1 is always 11.
okay.
I
And if
like
you're using
I
a
like
base,
to maximize possibilities.
but no, but if you're using not quite as much, but if you're using a base 2 number system, it's written as 10. But
Correct.
the point is, this is something that everybody thinks they know. And when you think you know, you don't pay any attention. But if you were adding 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 is 1. 1 wad of chewing gum, and so on and so forth. And so, when you realize a thing you think you know the best, you don't really know. And if you were to approach life realizing on some level that everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspectives. So you just don't know. And it's not just you, not just me, nobody knows. Then you come to whatever situation looking to find out. And as you actively notice the things you thought you knew and you find you didn't know them that well, your attention naturally goes to it. The neurons are firing. And the 45 years of research has shown, as you know, that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. It's
And
so easy.
enlivening and revealing. Revealing,
Yes.
you know. By the way, I have my own formula. It's called 0 is equal to infinity is equal to 1.
Okay, explain
0,
that one to me. Oh, I see. Right.
0 is equal to infinity is equal to 1.
Pretty good.
Okay. Now, in your book, I think the book is worth reading just for the first chapter, because you say, you start with the risks prediction and the illusion of control. So just that part of it is, for me, the entire book. When I've lived my life a bit like that, but to know that control is an illusion, that predictability is an illusion, and that risk is actually also an illusion is very freeing. There's nothing to do now. For example, I'm going um, to Europe next week. Okay, I'm going to England, Ireland, this, that, the other. There's a big program. I was going to go with my wife. She suddenly got COVID,
Oh,
and
no.
then some people in one of the countries I'm going thought I was too radical for the lecture, and I realized nothing about my next week is actually predictable.
Predictable, right.
Nothing, zero.
Right.
And I don't control any bit of it. And the whole thing is an illusion. It sets me free
Right.
totally.
Well, once you recognize that outcomes aren't assigned to events, things are not good or bad. If we're mindful, we have many ways of understanding anything that happens. And so for you, for me, and for more than a handful of other people, it doesn't matter what happens, it'll be good. You and I go out to dinner, the food is good, wonderful. You and I go out to dinner, the food is awful, wonderful. I won't gain weight, or I'll be able to pay more attention to your words of wisdom. That whatever happens, the experience of it is of our own making. And the important part in this book is that every single thought you have is essentially affecting your health. So it's not just your happiness, your well-being. Part of the book is about stress. And what people don't understand is, and they've heard this before, you and I have both said it, that events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views we take of it. So if you open it up and provide yourself with more ways of understanding it, obviously the stress will dissipate. But I have a one-liner that I want to share with you because I think it'll be helpful to people. It's very simple. Next time you get crazed, just ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? because rare, oh my God, I didn't get the project done in time. I'm dog ate my homework, whatever it is, as soon as you, take a breath and see that, so what? Life becomes easier. But stress itself is based on prediction. That what happens, I think that in order to experience stress, you need two things. First, a belief that something's going to happen. Second, that when it happens, it's going to be awful. But we just said prediction is an illusion. So if people just ask themselves, what are three reasons that it might not happen? What are three reasons that you might not have to leave your sick wife when you should be by her side this week and not get on that plane?
She's actually happy that I'm going.
That she's happy that you're going. I can appreciate that also. But we can always come up with reasons that it might not happen. And as soon as we do, we go from it's definitely going to happen to maybe it won't happen and you feel better. But then I like to say, imagine that it does happen. What's the other side of it? How might that actually be an advantage? And there are always advantages, and coming up with them, the neurons are firing again, and that's good for your health.
Well, that's very, very, very insightful, but it's also very practical. And it's right there in the first chapter of this book. And it is very freeing. Now, let me share with you an incident that happened in the late 70s. I was in Boston. I was training at that time at Tufts and at Harvard, also the medical school in neuroscience. And there was a conference on stress. And what's his name? God bless him. The stress response, the relaxation response at Harvard. Who am I thinking of?
Benson.
Benson. So Benson was there, a bunch of us that were there, and our guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Skip's guru as well, was there. And after everybody left, he called me and he whispered in Hindi in my ear. He said, "What is this stress?" He never heard the word. So, so I said, "It's the perception of threat." And he thought about it for a while. And then he said, "Oh, you mean it's resistance to existence," which is just,
oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
this is what she just said.
I love that. Right.
He said, either you resist or you flow.
Right.
It's a choice. And this is exactly what you said. If you ask yourself, what's the advantage? How can I reframe it? Is it a tragedy? Is it an inconvenience? Then you actually have overcome the resistance to existence and you start to flow. The other thing is, of course, now we have a principle in quantum mechanics. It's called the uncertainty principle.
Right.
And you also talk about the illusion of probability even,
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that one is a little more complicated. Let me just say that probabilities are in our heads. Events are improbabilities. Events happen or they don't happen. And, by assuming that it's going to happen, what happens is if the assumption is about something negative, it's easy to get crazy. But I think the most important part about probabilities comes down to science. Science, as you know, doesn't give us absolute facts. You do a study, and what you find, the point of it is that if you were to do, if it's significant, if you did the exact same thing, which you can't do, you're likely to get the same findings. These are translated to people in textbooks, schools, parents, as absolute facts. So for me, Deepak, this was wonderful. I wish you had been with me. My life changed. And remember, I'm a straight A, Harvard, Yale, all the way, right? I'm at this horse event, and this man asked me, can I watch his horse for him because he's going to get his horse a hot dog? And I tried to stay sweet, saying to myself, what is he, crazy? He comes back with the hot dog, and I loved it. The horse ate it. And it was at that moment that everything I thought I knew, I realized could be wrong, which also was nice because I like to, get rid of the hierarchy and, the vertical where we sat somewhere near the top and make it horizontal. This meant to me that all of the students who got B's, C's, D's may be better off than you and I who got our A's because they didn't buy into all of this or remember it or what have you. Anyway, the point is that this was something that I knew for sure and was wrong. and all of the facts. That's like the 1 and 1 is 2 that I said before. Once you recognize that you don't know, for me, this opened up enormous possibility. I started questioning things that everybody just takes for granted about chronic illness. You know, and chronic illness, by the way, is interesting because people understand it as there's nothing you can do about it. And all it really means is the medical world hasn't come up with what they see as the cure. But there are always things you can do about it. I mean, you know, and the simplest, if part of you is, you know, if you have a chronic illness and you build up the rest of your body, surely you're going to be in a better position to fight it. And we can always do that. But we have a technique that I call attention to symptom variability. That's just a fancy way of saying being mindful, notice change. That turns out, I think, to be very effective for the chronic illnesses we started. So you have a chronic illness. Most people assume that the symptoms you have will stay the same or just get worse. Nothing moves in only one direction. There are always little times it's a little better, you know, it's a little worse, and so on. So what we do is we get people to notice the times it's better, number one. So, wow, I'm not in pain all the time. And then we say, and why? Why now? Is it a little better? Three things happen when you do that. First, when you look for why it might be better, well, the first is that you feel a little better seeing that you're not always in this terrible state. Second, when you start asking yourself, why now and not before, you're doing that mindful search, which itself is good for your health. And third, if you look for a solution, I think you're much more likely to find it than if you don't. So we've done this with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, stroke, stress, depression, arthritis, chronic pain. And, you know, it's very easy, but you wouldn't think to try to cure a chronic illness with your mind if you believed in the mind-body separation. You know, then you simply turn to the medical world. And I had an experience when I was a kid that sort of supported this whole mind-body idea, although it hadn't fully grown at that time. I was married when I was very young.
I
So
read that, and then you
I
had
know it's terrible
another,
that I came
and
clean
later
with.
you had a woman as a spouse, right?
That's right. No, 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 no. This was a man
Okay.
at that time. My first, you know, I
Oh, no,
didn't.
later. I'm saying later.
Later, later I said I had enough of that. Let me try something new.
You're extraordinary. I love it.
But so I was 19 and we went to Paris for our honeymoon. And now I had to be, you know, I was 19 going on 40. I had to be a woman of the world because now I was married. So we're in a French restaurant and I ordered the mixed grill. One of the items on the mixed grill was pancreas. So I asked him, my new husband, which of these was the pancreas? He was more sophisticated than I. He said, that. Okay, I'm a big eater. I love eating. I love most things. And I'm eating and having a good time. Now comes the moment of truth. Can I eat the pancreas? And I had to because I had to prove that I was all grown up. I started eating it and I literally got sick. I was, you know, anyway, so I got sick to my stomach. He then starts to laugh. I said, why are you laughing? He said, that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a while ago. All right. Now, you know, I got myself sick. And I think in some way, we're constantly getting ourselves sick. And the path to wellness is much easier than most people assume.
There are many insights in what you just said. I'd like to start with the first one, that probability is in our head. Things happen or they don't happen. I think we should remember that for certain.
Well, but I think let me interrupt you for 1 second because even I spent time with this in my decision class, graduate decision class at Harvard, where you know, let's say there are 15 people. We'll make it 10 to make the arithmetic easy. And so I go around the room and we say, okay, you've got brown hair, you've got black hair. How many people have brown hair? And I count. Okay. Then I say, what is the likelihood that if everybody comes back, what is the probability that 70% of the class will have brown hair? I said, okay, but let's go around again. You know, your hair is light enough, we could actually call it blondish. Your hair is so dark brown, we can call it black. And so now the probability changes. And people don't realize that somebody's making a decision before we can do all the arithmetic. And that, well,
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And the other thing that makes total sense is if you notice when you're unwell and you're well, then you ask yourself, what am I going to notice that makes me well? And what am I going to notice that makes me
right,
unwell? That's as simple as that.
right.
And that's very profound. You know, I recently wrote 3 books with Rudy Tanzi at the Harvard Medical School.
Mhm.
He's a geneticist. And, you know, he's an extraordinary geneticist. He's discovered 43 genes. He
Mhm.
made brain in his lab and all that, a human brain in his lab. So he now is convinced. In fact, he was called to Congress because in our book, Super Brain and Super Genes, he made the claim, along with me, that less than 5% of disease is genetically determined. The rest is the choices we make,
Exactly.
to be genetic. And, you know, in the past, people would say a placebo effect and all that. And you have a wonderful chapter on placebo here. But, you know, I've been doing my little bit of research through AI and all this. And so
Mhm.
I recently asked 3 AI um, offerings, you know, Bard, Bing, and ChatGPT. I asked the following questions. Do our thoughts change gene activity? Unanimously, yes. Do our emotions change gene activity? Unanimously, yes. Do our interactions with other people change gene activity? Unanimously, yes. Does any experience change gene activity? Unanimously, yes. Is the placebo effect through epigenetic activity and modulation of gene
Ah.
activity? Answer, yes. So, you know, you were prescient before all this happened, but now everything you actually laid the groundwork
Yeah,
for through your lab is now being documented at the level of
that's
genetic.
wonderful. Yeah.
So, you know, it goes a long way.
Well,
Uh,
it used to be the medical model, you know this better than I, thought that psychology and disease were in parallel. In other words, your psychology had nothing to do with
yeah,
disease. You can be happy, unhappy.
yeah,
And then people got to the point with, believing that stress and things matter. My view, as you know, and I think yours as well, is all the way over. I think, as you've just said, that psychology is the major factor.
yeah,
And if you say to people that all disease is psychosomatic, they go crazy and they say, no, I'm really in pain.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Or it's my fault or something like that,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's so much in the book that it's impossible for me to go over, but I picked out a few nuggets for you to comment on. So, one of the nuggets I picked out earlier on is is that everybody thinks they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. And you know, this is in a sense that everybody's perspective is their truth, and in a way, you can't even change it. You know, there's a saying in Buddhism, in the Buddhist scriptures, that either all perspective is correct or no perspective.
Nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, this actually does away with the need for argument, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny that I'm pleased that you picked that out because of all the things I've said and all the books that I've written, this is actually to me the most important. A simple understanding that whatever the other person is doing makes sense. So every time you're disparaging somebody, you're being mindless. So to make it live for people, I can't bear you, Deepak. You are so inconsistent. From your perspective, you're flexible. You can't believe how gullible I am, but from my perspective, I'm trusting in every single negative attribution we have for somebody has an equally strong but oppositely valenced alternative. And so now, do you want me to change? Now that you know that it's because I'm trusting maybe you don't want me to change. And your inconsistency, now that I see it as you being flexible, that's kind of nice. Life just changes once you put aside all the ways that we're judgmental.
Yeah, it all not only makes life more joyful, but also creative. I think if every,
Yes,
otherwise we'd all be stuck with the same perspective. Where's the
exactly.
creativity?
Yeah.
Another nugget here, don't try to make the right decision, make the decision right.
Okay, so yeah, this is a little more complicated, but I think that we said, I believe that stress is the major killer. And when are people experiencing the stress? Typically when they're trying to make decisions. Now, if you think about doing a cost benefit analysis, and I don't know where that first came from, but there are lots of decision theorists who say that's what we should do. Once you recognize that every cost is also a benefit, right? I'm gullible, but I'm trusty. You're inconsistent, but you're flexible. Every single negative has an equally strong opposite. If you add them up, it's not going to tell you what to do. And so and also, when you start gathering information, there's no end to how much information. Each new piece could change the sense of what you're doing. There are other things as well, even as far as making the decision in the first place. How do you decide to make a decision? And how do you decide that? And so on. It becomes an infinite regress. You can't do, and people don't do what they think they should be doing. So they're doing the right things. They're just worried about. And so I argue, rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, make the decision right. Whatever happens, one can turn it so that their life goes forward in a positive way. All decision making is based on an understanding from the past. And we know that each of those things that we're deciding may vary, even if you're hiring somebody for a corporation. You're hiring, I don't want to get too deep into this, but you hire somebody yesterday and today chat comes out. And all of a sudden, that person is not needed in the same way. And things are always changing. So I think that what we need to do as a rule is to stop using yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. But certainly with decision making, just do it, whatever it is, do it and make it work. Then what happens is people regret, oh my gosh, because they see what they did negatively rather than realize the upside. And then they regret that they didn't choose another alternative, mindlessly assuming that that other alternative would have been better.
Yeah.
It could have been even worse.
Yeah. Unpredictable.
Exactly.
I was also thinking when you were talking about perception, when I was in medical school, this was way in the 60s, I read an experiment where scientists took some kittens and they brought them up in a room that had only horizontal stripes, other group of kittens in a room that had vertical stripes. And when these kittens grew up to be wise old cats, they could only see a horizontal world or a
Yeah,
vertical world. So all perception is learned, right? And
exactly.
cultural phenomenon and economics and history and parents, and it's very
Right.
complicated, but the perception we have of the world is always a magical lie anyway.
Exactly. And people don't realize that in some ways, the more you know, the more blind you become.
No
You
more.
know, and that's why making predictions is so bad for us, because it's like a lens that then you look through it to understand what's going on and you miss everything else.
You also said in the book, and I forget, I made notes somewhere, but you said that
I'm
perception.
very glad that you read it this carefully, because I
Oh,
was
yeah.
planning on testing you and now I won't.
No. So you said somewhere that perception is determined by identity, social identity. Eh, Say a little
Yeah,
bit.
well, that as I've just said, and I have another one liner, and this one is harder to understand, but it's sort of predict today and you'll lose tomorrow. Because once we're making predictions, we're looking for the thing that we're predicting, ignoring everything else, and we miss most of what's going on. And so, it's sort of if you just had a cow And we have the farmer looking at the cow, we have a chemist looking at the cow, a rancher, a Hindu, that they're not seeing the same thing. And it's not as if they're seeing all of it, but liking only the part that's relevant to them. They're really blind to it. And I think that there was a wonderful study that Simon and Shabriz did where they have people watching a basketball game, and in the middle of the game, somebody dressed in a gorilla suit comes on the court. And it's hard to believe this, but people do not see it.
Saw that.
So we ran a little study where I tell people, look, all basketball games are just like other basketball games. Otherwise, we wouldn't call them basketball games. But just as certainly, excuse me, each game is different from each other game. So I want you to watch this video and pay some attention to the ways it's the same and the ways it's different. Code, watch it mindfully, and they see the gorilla.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Again, this reminds me of an incident in medical school. In 1969, I was in India before I came to the United States in 1970. I was in a village posting outside of Delhi, and the elders brought a teenage boy to have him examined. They said he needs a neurologist or a psychologist because he's gone mad. So I said, why do you think he's mad? He just came from Delhi, and he says he heard on the radio that there are men on the moon. And so he's mad. I said, why do you think he's mad? There are men on the moon. But they said, well, then you need to be examined. The moon is a goddess we worship. So and then, we had a village meeting, actually, a panchayat, and we came to the conclusion that the kid was right, and they were right too. They were talking about different moons.
Right, exactly. That's great.
So yeah, there's some very interesting stuff here that I want you also to comment. One is on imagined eating, and the other is on imagined exercise. I think people will love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're doing a study right now, and I'll come back and talk with you in 3 weeks or a month. So we have people, there are these videos online that my students made me aware of. I think they're called mucks or whatever it is. And so the video is just of a person eating pizza. Why anyone would want to watch this, but the kids watch it. And so I said, okay, let's use these videos where we have one group count the number of times the person chews. So that's to ensure that they're actually watching it, a control group. But another group is in their minds ingesting the pizza, imagining the smell, the texture, and so on. All right. And the question is, what will happen? Now, if I didn't do all the other studies that you read about there, I would probably assume, like everybody else, nothing will happen. They won't gain weight, they won't lose weight. But if your mind and body are one, and you're imagining yourself eating, I think you'll lose weight possibly, but the strange possibility is that you'll gain weight. Then we're going to have to revise some of our laws of physics. So, I don't have any of these data yet. But for the imagined exercise, it's very straightforward, work by other people primarily, where if you, imagine, moving your arm back and forth or lifting weights, you lose weight if that's the goal of it, or you gain muscle mass, or whatever your intention is, almost to the same extent as actually doing it. Now, the chambermaid study makes this point clearly also, right? We take these women. Did I just talk about this?
No, you didn't.
I didn't. I haven't.
Tell us about.
Yeah, I've been doing so many of these podcasts, I can't remember what I've said to whom. Thank you. Okay, so you go to chambermaids, and the first thing we ask them is, how much exercise do you get? Interestingly, these women exercise all day long, but they think exercise is only what you do after work. After work, they're just too tired. Very simple study. We take lots of measures, we divide them then into two groups, and all we're going to do is teach one group that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working on this machine at the gym. So now we have two groups. One has the mindset that their work is exercise, the other not. And we make sure they haven't eaten anymore in the course of the study. They're not exercising any harder. As far as we could tell, all that was different was one group sees their work as exercise. As a result of the change in mindset, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down just by, yeah. And, we have so many of these studies now that I'm as convinced as one can be, always having a modicum of, uncertainty. But
As you're speaking to me right now, I have uh, I just came up with a study. Okay, bear with me for a second. Maybe you can do the study if you're inspired by the thought. So, I have a daily practice of yoga, and that includes about 30 postures: lying postures, sitting postures, twists, forward bends, backward bends. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so forward bend, backward bend, twists, lying, sitting, and standing. And each of these postures, we now find out, stimulates a particular branch of the vagus nerve, parasympathetic nervous system, which causes self-regulation and increases homeostasis and all of that, healing. I mean, you can look it up, the research is there. But right now, you give me an idea. You have one group practicing yoga and the other imagining the
imagining.
postures. And let's see what happens to heart rate variability, because that's such a good,
Right.
easy thing to measure, right? You measure heart rate variability with those who are doing yoga and those who are imagining yoga.
Right.
But we get adepts both in imagination and in yoga. What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, we'll collaborate on that one. But
Heart rate variability.
yeah, then
Measure
I'm
heart
with
rate
you.
variability. That's all you measure.
Yeah, and that's an easier measure than many of these physical
Many
measures
of them.
we have to take. Yeah, without question.
So
But
this is,
so
yeah.
that chambermaid study was the second study in the mind body unity package. Let me tell people, if you will, about maybe the most recent one.
Yes,
So
please.
here we inflict a wound. Now, as I'm fond of saying, we would have liked to, but not really, make it a big wound. I don't want to hurt anybody. And I don't think the review board passing on the study would have let me, even if I did. But so it's a minor wound, but a wound nonetheless. And people are in front of a clock. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going half as fast as real time.
Do they know that?
They don't know. No, they just see the clock. That was an important question. Thank you. Everybody thinks whatever the clock says is what's happening. So it's either going fast, slow, or real time. And the question we're asking is, does that wound heal based on perceived time, clock time, or real time? And obviously, I wouldn't be telling you this if it wasn't perceived time. We have studies where we have people in a sleep lab, and they wake up and they see the clock. They think they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. Biological and cognitive functioning seems to follow perceived sleep. We did a study with diabetics, type 2 diabetes. So people, they come in, we give them a lot of tests, then we're going to sit them down at a computer. All of this will be clear in a moment, again, using a clock. So we tell them, play some computer games, but change the game every 15 minutes or so. So that's to ensure that they'll look at the clock. Again, the clock is going twice as fast as real time, half as fast as real time, or real time. What we find is blood sugar level follows perceived time, not real time.
I love this study because in one way it corroborates the study you did originally, the what you're calling it, the retro
And the
experience
counterclockwise study.
counterclockwise. It
Well, now we can call it the Simpsons study.
the Simpson study. So the Simpson study it reinforces in another way that perceived time affects how we age. Okay, but you're now talking about biological parameters, including sugar levels, diabetes. So there's an ancient text in India. It's called the Yoga Vasishtha, and it says time is the consumer, and we are its food. We are its food. So we are time's food. Then it goes further to say that our biological clock is a function of perceived time. It says that in this
Huh.
ancient text. So what I'm thinking now, again, as you speak, that here's another study. You actually do the same clock thing, and then you study biological age. You measure telomerase level or telomeres.
Yeah,
And
no, I wanted to do that
I
actually.
think it's an obvious outcome of these,
Yeah.
what you're saying. So
Yeah, but it's also interesting to me that the world is still much more convinced when you speak neuroscience. You know
yeah,
that
but neuroscience is the correlate of psychological science.
yes, exactly.
You know, it is the correlate. It's just the biological correlate of what's happening in the mind. I mean, that's part of the hard problem of consciousness. They're trying to figure out how atoms and molecules produce mind. They'll never figure it out because
Then they
atoms
won't
and
know.
molecules are the movement of mind, you know.
Right, right.
So, before we end, because we have a time limit for various social media outlets, this is going to go on YouTube, but then,
Oh,
of course, you know, Facebook, and now we have Threads and all this, Instagram, yeah, TikTok. So they all have different time schedules. So we have to finish soon. But I had, as my last questions, actually was a comment that after I read your book, I realized first, the impermanence and illusion of identity. Second, the illusion of experience. Third, the illusion of predictability. Fourth, the illusion of control. So, what's real?
okay. Yeah, so that's very interesting. I mean, I didn't claim all those illusions, but you certainly
Well,
can read.
I,
No,
I
it's there.
kind of,
No,
I
it's
kind
all
of,
there. Right. It was
yeah.
very smart of you. All that's really there is what's happening now. And that when you recognize that what's happening now can be understood in so many different ways, and why bother trying to understand all the different ways it can be understood? This may sound like a Hallmark card and be sort of, you know, silly in some ways, but life only consists of moments. And if we make the moment matter, then it all matters. And, for me, the most important part of all of this is that it's so easy. That when you actively notice things, and that necessarily puts you in the present and the neurons are firing, but it's the essence of engagement. It feels good. So how many things that feel this good are so good for you? And you light up. So we have data showing people find you more authentic and charismatic. It leaves its imprint on the things that we do. And all you need to do is notice. And you're not going to notice unless you start off realizing you don't know. I'm very proud of not knowing. I don't know about you.
I am too. I mean, that was what Socrates said. The only thing I know is I don't know, right? My very special guest has been Professor Ellen Langer. The book is called The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. Dr. Langer is a very accomplished lifetime academic. She's been a tenured professor in psychology for as long as I've known her at Harvard. She's the recipient of 3 Distinguished Scientist Awards, and there's a lot more to say about her. But get this book and read it. It might just change your life and also give you more joy in every moment of life and extend your longevity in the direction of health span rather than just lifespan. Thank you, Ellen, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Deepak. Nice to see you.